I remember the day I started my business like it was yesterday, January 15th, 1982. A bitterly cold morning in Chicago, snow piled 3 feet high against the storefront I'd just signed a 5-year lease on. 28 years old, with nothing but $4,700 in savings, a business loan that kept me awake at night, and a dream that wouldn't let me rest. The sign wasn't even up yet. Miller Precision Parts. Not the most exciting name, but it said what we did, what I did, back then. Just me, in an 800-square-foot shop with second-hand equipment, working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. My hands perpetually stained with machine oil. My back already developing the ache that would become my constant companion for the next 40 years. My wife Sarah would bring me dinner most nights. She was teaching elementary school then, supporting us while I poured everything into the business. We'd eat together on an upturned crate, our breath visible in the barely heated space, talking about the future, about the children we'd have, about the legacy I was building. "It's going to be worth it," she'd say, her hand on mine, believing in me with a certainty I couldn't always muster for myself. "You're building something that will outlast both of us, Henry." And for many years, it seemed she was right. By the time my son Michael was born in 1985, I had 3 employees and had expanded to the space next door. When my daughter Rebecca came along 3 years later, we were supplying precision components to 2 major manufacturing clients, and I was finally paying myself a salary that meant Sarah could cut back her teaching hours to spend more time with the kids. The business grew steadily through the 90s. Not spectacularly, we weren't that kind of operation, but solidly. By 2005, Miller Precision employed 37 people, occupied a 25,000-square-foot facility in an industrial park outside the city, and had annual revenues of just under $5 million. Not an empire by any means, but something I was proud of. Something built with my own hands, my own sweat, through countless nights away from my family. "You missed my baseball game again," Michael would say, his young face a mask of disappointment that cut me deeper than he knew. "Daddy's building something important," Sarah would explain, always my defender. "Something that will be yours someday." And that was always the plan, that Michael would join the business, learn it from the ground up as I had, and eventually take over. That all my sacrifices would mean something beyond a comfortable life for my family, that I was creating a legacy. When Michael graduated from Northwestern with his business degree in 2007, I thought the plan was on track. He joined the company immediately, and I started him in the shop just as I'd started. He needed to understand the fundamentals of what we made, how we made it, and the people who did the making. He lasted 3 months on the shop floor before coming to my office, closing the door behind him. "Dad, this is a waste of my education," he said, his voice controlled but his eyes burning with that intensity he'd had since childhood. "I should be in management, helping you modernize. The way we're doing things is outdated." I reminded him that I'd started sweeping floors, that there was no substitute for understanding the heart of the business. He listened, or at least he appeared to, nodding in that way that I would later recognize meant he was simply waiting for me to finish speaking. The next day, he came to work in a suit. He'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation on strategic growth initiatives that he insisted on showing me. Some of his ideas were good. He'd always been smart, my son, but others showed his fundamental misunderstanding of our business, our customers, our people. "These precision tolerances can be achieved with newer automated equipment," he said, pointing to a slide showing machines that cost more than our annual profit. "We could cut the shop staff by 60% and increase output." "Those men have families, Michael," I said quietly. "Some of them have been with me for 20 years. He sighed, the exaggerated sigh of the young explaining to the old. "It's business, Dad, not a charity." That was the first real crack. Though I didn't recognize it then, I compromised, moving Michael to a management position in sales and marketing, areas where his contemporary knowledge might be valuable. And in some ways it was. He brought in new clients, launched our first real website, computerized systems that had been manual for decades. The business grew faster under his influence. By 2012, we were approaching $8 million in annual revenue, but costs grew too, and our margins shrank. The family atmosphere that had always characterized Miller Precision began to change. Long-time employees left or were pushed out, replaced by younger, cheaper staff who didn't remember my name, let alone know about Sarah's Christmas cookies, or the annual company picnic at Lake Michigan. "It's a new era, Dad," Michael would say whenever I questioned these changes. "We need to adapt or die." Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I was becoming the dinosaur my son increasingly treated me as. But I still owned 100% of the company, and I still had the final say, or so I thought. Sarah's diagnosis came in the spring of 2015. Pancreatic cancer, already spread to her liver. The prognosis was bleak from the start, but Sarah faced it with the same quiet strength she'd shown throughout our life together. "Don't neglect the business because of me," she insisted, even as the treatments ravaged her once vibrant body. "It's your life's work." "You're my life's work," I told her, holding her increasingly frail hand. But I couldn't be with her every moment. The business still needed attention, and in my distraction, I delegated more responsibility to Michael. He stepped up admirably, working long hours and keeping things running while I spent as much time as possible at Sarah's side. She died 13 months after the diagnosis, on a perfect June morning when the sun streamed through the hospice window and bathed her face in golden light. Her last words to me were about the children. "They're good people, Henry," she whispered. "We did that right, at least." I took a month away from the business after the funeral, just disappeared to our lake cabin in Wisconsin, turned off my phone, and sat on the dock watching the water and talking to Sarah's ghost. Michael ran everything in my absence, and when I returned, he presented me with detailed reports showing that everything was not just fine without me, but better. "We landed the Carson contract," he announced proudly. Carson Industries was a major manufacturer we'd been courting for years, and I've implemented a new ERP system that's already increasing efficiency by 22%. I should have been proud. Should have been grateful. Instead, I felt obsolete. Rebecca, meanwhile, had built her own life away from the family business. She'd become a clinical psychologist, married a kind man named David, and given us 2 grandchildren who were the lights of my life after Sarah's passing. She lived in Indianapolis, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to have her own orbit. "How's it going with Michael at work?" she asked during one of her visits, about 6 months after Sarah died. Her tone was casual, but her eyes, so like her mother's, watched me carefully. "Fine," I said automatically. "He's doing well." "Really?" She set down her coffee cup. "Because you don't seem fine about it." I started to offer another platitude, then stopped. Rebecca had always been perceptive, even as a child. "He's changing everything," I admitted. "Sometimes I barely recognize the company I built." "Have you talked to him about it?" I shook my head. "He'd say I'm resistant to change, that I'm too old to understand modern business." Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. "It's still your company, Dad. Your name is still on the door." But was it? Miller Precision Parts had been renamed Miller Advanced Manufacturing Solutions the previous year. Michael's idea, of course. More contemporary, he'd explained, better reflecting our evolving service offerings. I started paying closer attention after that conversation with Rebecca, started coming into the office earlier, staying later, reclaiming some of the responsibilities I'd ceded. Michael seemed annoyed by my renewed presence, but didn't openly object. That's when I began noticing things. Small discrepancies in the financial reports, new vendors I'd never approved, a subsidiary LLC I hadn't been consulted on, registered in Michael's name alongside Miller Advanced Manufacturing. "It's just for tax purposes," he explained when I questioned him. "Our accountant recommended it. I was going to bring it up at the next quarterly review." I nodded, accepting the explanation, even as something cold settled in my stomach. That night, I called our longtime accountant, Tom Fisher, at his home. "Tax structure? No. I never recommended creating a separate LLC," Tom said, confusion evident in his voice. "In fact, I haven't done any work for Miller since last October. Michael said you were moving to a larger firm." The cold in my stomach spread. I thanked Tom and hung up, then sat in my darkened living room for hours, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to convince myself that there must be a reasonable explanation. That my son, my only son, Sarah's son, couldn't possibly be doing what it seemed he was doing. The next day I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before Michael typically arrived. Caroline, my executive assistant for the past 15 years, looked surprised to see me. "I need to see all the corporate documents," I told her. "Articles of incorporation, banking authorizations, recent contracts, everything." She hesitated. "Michael has reorganized the filing system." Most of that would be in his office now. I need to see it, I repeated, my voice firmer than I intended. Caroline's expression shifted subtly. Later, I would recognize it as pity. "Mr. Miller," she said gently, "maybe you should talk to Michael first." "I'm still the CEO of this company," I reminded her, the unfamiliar anger rising in my chest. "And I'm asking you to provide me with corporate documents." She nodded then, her expression carefully neutral, and led me not to Michael's office but to a small conference room. "I'll bring what I can find," she said. An hour later, I sat surrounded by papers, my hands trembling slightly as the full picture emerged. Over the past year, while I had been distracted by Sarah's illness and death, Michael had been systematically restructuring the company. The new LLC, Miller Holdings Group, now owned 51% of Miller Advanced Manufacturing, and I had apparently signed over that controlling interest to my son. Except I hadn't. The signature on the transfer documents was mine, but I had never seen these papers before, let alone signed them. My son had forged my signature. I was still sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of my son's betrayal, when Michael walked in at 8:45. He stopped short in the doorway, his expression cycling rapidly from surprise to concern to something harder. "Dad," he said carefully, "what are you doing?" I held up the transfer documents. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" He closed the door behind him and took a seat across from me. His face composed itself into an expression of patient concern that made me want to throw something. "Find out what? That I've been protecting the company while you were indisposed? That I've grown revenue by 34% in the last fiscal year? That I've positioned us for acquisition by Meridian Industrial at a valuation of $23 million. Acquisition? The word felt like a physical blow. "You're selling my company." "Our company," he corrected smoothly. "And yes, it's the logical next step. You'll still receive 49% of the proceeds, almost $11 million, more than enough for a very comfortable retirement." "I never agreed to any of this," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "And I never signed these documents." Michael's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Yes, you did, Dad. Last September. You were distracted with Mom's treatments, but we discussed it. The restructuring was necessary for tax purposes and to make us more attractive to investors." "That's a lie." The words came out flat and hard. "Is it?" Michael leaned forward. "You've been under enormous strain. Grief can do strange things to memory. Everyone understands that you haven't been yourself." The implication was clear. His word against mine. The grieving, aging father versus the competent, forward-thinking son. Who would people believe? "This is fraud," I said. "I'll fight it." Michael sighed, a sound so reminiscent of Sarah that it made my chest ache. "Think about what you're saying, Dad. Think about what a legal battle would do to this company, to our family." He gestured at the papers spread across the table. "Besides, your signature is on everything. Properly witnessed and notarized. It's not my signature. It looks exactly like your signature," he countered. "And legally, it is your signature. Unless you want to accuse your own son of forgery, take me to court, create a scandal that would destroy the value of the company and tear our family apart." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. "Why?" I finally asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because you're too old to understand business anymore," he said, his voice softer now, almost kind. "The world has changed, Dad. You built something good, but you can't see that holding on to it will destroy it. This acquisition is the right move. I'm doing what needs to be done. Without even consulting me. Would you have agreed?" "No." "Exactly." He stood up, straightening his tailored suit jacket. "The Meridian deal closes in 3 weeks. Their team will be here tomorrow to begin due diligence. I suggest you take some time off. Process this and try to see the bigger picture. This is a good outcome for everyone." He paused at the door. "I've scheduled a family dinner at Gianfranco's on Friday. Rebecca and David are driving up. I thought we could celebrate together." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the evidence of his betrayal and the wreckage of my life's work. I sat there for a long time, the familiar sounds of the business continuing around me. Phones ringing, machines humming in the distance, the occasional burst of laughter from the break room, life continuing as though mine hadn't just been shattered. Eventually, I gathered the documents into a neat pile and left, nodding to Caroline as I passed her desk. Her eyes held that same pity, and I wondered how long she had known. How many of my loyal employees had watched this happening and said nothing? I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing through options that all seemed impossible. I could go to the police, accuse my son of fraud and forgery. But Michael was right. It would be my word against his, and the signatures did look convincing. I could file a civil suit, but that would take time we didn't have, with the sale closing in 3 weeks. I could try to rally the board of directors, but Michael had been cultivating relationships with them for years while I focused on operations. I pulled into my driveway and sat there, engine idling, staring at the house Sarah and I had shared for 35 years, the house where we'd raised our children, where we'd built our life together. "What would you do, Sarah?" I whispered to the empty car. But for once I couldn't imagine what she would say. I finally went inside and poured myself 2 fingers of the scotch I rarely drank. The house felt cavernous around me, filled with echoes and memories. I took out my phone and almost called Rebecca, then stopped. What would I tell her? That her brother had betrayed me, that the family legacy was being sold off to strangers. That might force her to choose sides, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her too. Instead, I called the one person who might understand the legal ramifications without immediate judgment. "Martin Sullivan," answered my old friend, a retired corporate attorney who'd handled Miller Precision's legal work for decades before his retirement 5 years earlier. "Martin, it's Henry Miller." "Henry," his voice warmed, "it's been too long. How are you holding up?" "Not well," I admitted. "I need your advice, unofficially." "Of course," he said, instantly serious. "What's happened?" I laid out the situation as concisely as I could. The restructuring, the forged signatures, the impending sale. As I spoke, I could almost see Martin nodding on the other end, his analytical mind processing the information. "This is serious, Henry," he said when I finished. "If what you're saying is true, Michael has committed several felonies." "If it's true," I repeated. "But how do I prove it?" "The signatures would be the key. We'd need to demonstrate they're forgeries. Do you have any documents you definitely signed during that period for comparison?" I thought for a moment. "My mortgage statement. I refinanced last August. And Sarah's medical forms from the hospital. That's a start. A forensic document examiner could potentially prove the forgery. But Henry," he paused, "you need to consider what you want the outcome to be here. Do you want to send your son to prison?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "No," I said immediately. "I just want my company back." "Then a criminal complaint might not be your best option. It would certainly stop the sale, but it would also likely destroy the company's value and reputation, not to mention your family. So what do I do?" Martin was quiet for a moment. "You need leverage," he finally said. "Something that makes Michael back down without the nuclear option of criminal charges." "What kind of leverage?" "That depends on Michael. What does he value most? What would he be unwilling to risk losing?" I considered the question. The Michael I thought I knew. The boy who'd played baseball in our backyard, who'd cried when his mother was diagnosed, that Michael would have valued family above all. But this new Michael, the one who could forge his father's signature and lie to his face, I wasn't sure what he valued anymore. "The deal," I finally said. "He wants this acquisition to go through. It would be his big success story." "Then that's your leverage point," Martin said. "You need to position yourself to threaten the deal without actually having to follow through and hurt yourself in the process." "How do I do that?" "I need to think about it. Let me make some calls. See what options we might have. Don't do anything yet. And Henry," his voice turned grave, "don't confront Michael again until we have a plan. Don't give him any reason to accelerate his timeline or take additional steps to secure his position." I agreed and hung up, feeling marginally better for having shared the burden. Martin had always been a shrewd strategist, in addition to being a good friend. If anyone could help me find a way through this mess, it was him. The next morning, I drove past the office and saw unfamiliar cars in the parking lot, Meridian's due diligence team, presumably. I kept driving, following Martin's advice to stay away for now. Instead, I went to the bank where I'd done business for 30 years and asked to speak with the branch manager privately. "Mr. Miller," Diane Peterson greeted me warmly. "What can I do for you today?" "I need information about recent transactions on my business accounts," I explained. Her expression turned apologetic. "I'd be happy to help, but you're no longer listed as an authorized signatory on the Miller Advanced Manufacturing accounts. Those were changed to require only Mr. Michael Miller's signature about 6 months ago." Another shock, though I should have expected it. "I see. And who authorized that change?" She tapped at her computer, then turned the screen to show me. "You did, Mr. Miller. Here's the authorization form with your signature." I looked at the signature, so similar to my own. "Could I get a copy of that form, please?" "Of course." She printed it for me, her expression now curious but professional. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" I hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Diane, I've banked here for 30 years. You've known me for at least 20 of those. Did I come in and sign this form?" She glanced at the paper, then back at me, her professional mask slipping slightly. "I don't recall seeing you that day, but signatures are verified by our system. And this one passed authentication. Because it's a very good forgery," I said quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Miller, are you saying—" "I'm not making any accusations," I interrupted gently. "I'm just trying to understand what's happened with my company. Thank you for your help." I left with the copied form, another piece of evidence for whatever plan Martin was developing. As I was getting into my car, my phone rang. "Rebecca." "Dad, are you okay? Michael just told me about the acquisition. It's happening so fast." I gripped the phone tighter. "What exactly did he tell you?" "That you and he had been planning this for months. That it's a great deal that will secure the family's financial future. That you're having a hard time letting go, which he says is completely understandable." She paused. "Is that true? Are you struggling with this?" I closed my eyes, weighing my words carefully. Rebecca loved her brother. I didn't want to force her to choose sides. Not yet. "It's complicated," I said finally. "But Michael's right that I'm having a hard time with it." "Oh, Dad." Her voice softened with sympathy. "I know how much the company means to you, but maybe this is for the best. You've worked so hard for so long. Maybe it's time to enjoy life a little." "Maybe," I conceded, unwilling to burden her with the truth just yet. "Are you still coming for dinner on Friday?" "Of course. David and I will drive up Friday morning. The kids are staying with his parents." She hesitated. "Dad, whatever you decide about the company, Michael and I will support you. We just want you to be happy." "Mom would want that too." The mention of Sarah nearly broke my composure. "I know, sweetheart. I'll see you Friday." The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and research. I spoke with Martin twice more as his plan began to take shape. I drove by several of our long-term clients, ostensibly to say hello, but really to gather information about how their relationships with Miller had changed under Michael's leadership. What I learned was illuminating. 2 clients mentioned that their contracts had been renegotiated with less favorable terms in recent months. Another expressed concern about quality control issues that had never been a problem during my active management. Her third was surprised to learn that I was no longer involved in day-to-day operations, having been told I was pursuing other interests. By Thursday evening, I had a clearer picture of what had been happening at my company, and it wasn't pretty. Michael hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd begun sacrificing the company's long-term stability and reputation for short-term gains that would make the acquisition numbers look better. Martin called just after 9 p.m. "I think we have our approach," he said without preamble. "It's not perfect, but it gives us leverage." "I'm listening." "I've spoken with a former colleague at the SEC," he explained. "Hypothetically, of course. Based on what you've told me, there are potential securities fraud issues with how this acquisition is being structured. If Meridian is being misled about material aspects of Miller's business, that could constitute fraud in connection with a securities transaction. Would that be enough to stop the deal?" "It would certainly delay it long enough for a thorough investigation, and no acquirer wants to touch a company under SEC investigation." He paused. "But Henry, this approach comes with risks. If we trigger an SEC investigation, it could harm the company's value even if you regain control. What's the alternative? Let Michael sell my life's work out from under me based on forged documents?" "No," Martin said firmly. "The alternative is to use the threat of this approach to force Michael to negotiate. He wants this deal. If he believes you can and will derail it, he might be willing to restore your position to avoid that outcome. And if he calls my bluff, then it wasn't a bluff. We follow through." Martin's voice was steady. "But Henry, there's something else you should consider. If Michael has done what you believe, forged documents, misrepresented the company's situation, then he's vulnerable, not just legally but reputationally. His entire future career could be at stake." The implication was clear. I had the power to destroy my son's future. The thought made me physically ill. "There has to be another way," I said. Some solution that doesn't end with either of us ruined. There might be, Martin acknowledged. But first, we need to establish your willingness to fight. Otherwise, Michael has no incentive to compromise. We talked through the specifics of the plan for another hour. By the time we hung up, I had a clear sense of what needed to happen at tomorrow's dinner. I didn't sleep well that night. My dreams filled with Sarah's disappointed face and the sound of Michael's childhood laughter. Friday arrived with a perfect early autumn crispness in the air. Under different circumstances, it would have been the kind of day Sarah and I might have spent at the lake house, watching the leaves begin to turn. Instead, I spent the morning reviewing documents and rehearsing what I would say that evening. Rebecca and David arrived around noon. Seeing my daughter's smile as she embraced me nearly cracked my fragile composure. "You look tired, Dad," she said, studying my face with concern. "Just not sleeping well," I admitted. "How are the kids?" She let me change the subject, and we spent a pleasant afternoon catching up. David, always perceptive, seemed to sense the underlying tension but didn't press. Around 6 p.m. we all dressed for dinner and drove to Gianfranco's, an upscale Italian restaurant that had been a family favorite for special occasions. Michael was already there when we arrived, seated at a corner table with a bottle of champagne chilling beside him. He stood as we approached, embracing Rebecca and shaking David's hand warmly before turning to me. "Dad," he said, offering his hand. "Glad you could make it." I shook it briefly, noting the expensive watch on his wrist and the confident set of his shoulders. He looked every inch the successful businessman, ready to celebrate his triumph. The first part of dinner passed with surface pleasantries. Michael charmed Rebecca and David with stories about the acquisition, painting a rosy picture of the future. I remained mostly silent, watching my son perform, because that's what it was, a performance designed to cast himself as the visionary, and me as the aging founder reluctantly passing the torch. After the main course, Michael signaled for the champagne to be opened. "I think it's time for a toast," he announced, raising his glass once everyone had been served. "To Dad, who built something extraordinary from nothing, and to the next chapter for all of us." Rebecca and David raised their glasses. I did not. "What's wrong, Dad?" Michael asked, his smile fixed but his eyes wary. "Aren't you going to toast your own success?" "I'd like to propose a different toast," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "To honesty, to integrity, to family trust." A flicker of something, alarm, perhaps, crossed Michael's face. "Of course," he recovered smoothly. "Those values have always been the foundation of our family and our business." Rebecca was looking between us, her psychologist's insight clearly detecting the undercurrents. "What's going on?" she asked quietly. I took a deep breath. This was the moment Martin and I had planned for, the confrontation that would either force Michael to negotiate or escalate the conflict beyond repair. "Michael has been lying to you," I said to Rebecca, but my eyes stayed on my son. "He's been lying to everyone. He forged my signature on documents transferring control of the company to himself. He's selling the business without my consent, and he systematically undermined everything I spent 40 years building." The table fell silent. David looked down at his plate, clearly uncomfortable. Rebecca's eyes widened in shock. "Dad," Michael said, his voice a warning, "you're upset about the changes. That's understandable. But these accusations are serious and completely unfounded." "Are they?" I removed an envelope from my jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "I have copies of the forged documents here. I have statements from our bank confirming I wasn't present when the account authorizations were changed. I have testimony from our former accountant that he never recommended the restructuring you claimed he did." Michael's face hardened. "This is ridiculous. You're confused. Grief and age." "Don't," I cut him off sharply. "Don't try to paint me as senile or unstable. It won't work." Rebecca was looking at the envelope, her face pale. "Michael, is this true?" "Of course not," he scoffed. But there was a new tension in his shoulders. "Dad's upset about the acquisition. He's looking for someone to blame for changes he doesn't like, but were necessary for the company's survival." "Necessary?" I leaned forward. "Was it necessary to tell the Carson Group that we could meet delivery schedules we both know are impossible? Was it necessary to defer critical equipment maintenance to make the quarterly numbers look better? Was it necessary to hide declining quality metrics from Meridian's due diligence team?" Each question landed like a physical blow. Michael's confident facade began to crack. "You've been spying on me?" he demanded, anger replacing his smooth confidence. I've been investigating what's happened to my company, I corrected, and tomorrow I'll be sharing my findings with Meridian's executive team, and if necessary, with the SEC. You wouldn't dare, Michael's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You'd destroy everything. No. Son, you've already done that. I stood up slowly. Rebecca, David, I'm sorry to ruin dinner. This isn't how I wanted you to find out. Rebecca looked stricken. Dad, wait. I'll be at home if you want to talk later, I told her gently. I think Michael and I need some space right now. I walked out of the restaurant, my heart pounding but my mind clear. The first phase of Martin's plan was complete. I'd shown Michael I was willing to fight, even at the cost of family harmony. Now we would see if he was willing to negotiate. I'd barely arrived home when my phone rang. Michael, you're making a terrible mistake, he said without preamble. If you go to Meridian with these accusations, the deal will collapse. The company will lose millions in value. Is that what you want? What I want is my company back, I replied calmly. What I want is for my son to admit what he's done and make it right. It's too late for that. The restructuring is legally binding. Regardless of how it happened, the sale is in motion, contracts have been drafted. Nothing is binding if it's based on fraud, I countered, and nothing is final until signatures are on the final documents. He was quiet for a moment. What exactly are you proposing? Meet me at the office tomorrow morning. 8 a.m., just you and me, we'll talk about how to fix this. There's nothing to fix, he insisted, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. 8 a.m., Michael, or I call Meridian's CEO directly at 9. I hung up without waiting for his response. 10 minutes later, Rebecca called. Dad? Her voice was shaky. Michael just left. I've never seen him like that. I'm sorry you had to be there for this, I said sincerely. I didn't want to put you in the middle. Is it true? What you said about him forging documents? I closed my eyes, hating that I had to shatter her image of her brother. Yes, I have proof. She was quiet for a long moment. I want to see it. Not tonight, but I need to understand what's happening. Of course, whenever you're ready. I paused. Where are you and David staying tonight? We were going to stay with Michael, but she trailed off. We've got a hotel reservation as backup. You know you're always welcome here, I offered. I know, Dad, but I think we need a neutral space tonight. It's a lot to process. After we hung up, I sat in Sarah's favorite chair, the one I'd never had the heart to move after she died. I wish you were here, I told her ghost. You'd know what to do. But as the night deepened around me, I realized that perhaps I did know what to do. Not just what Martin had strategized, but what Sarah would have wanted, a resolution that preserved what could be salvaged of our family, even as it addressed the betrayal at its heart. I arrived at the office at 7:30 the next morning, using my key to let myself in. The building was empty on a Saturday, the machine silent, the offices dark. I went to my old office, now largely stripped of personal touches, and waited. Michael arrived at 7:58, his face tight with anger and something else, fear perhaps. He closed the door behind him and remained standing. Let's get this over with, he said. What do you want? Sit down, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. We have a lot to discuss. He sat reluctantly, his body language defensive. If you think you can undo everything, you're wrong. It's too late. It's never too late to do the right thing, I said, echoing words Sarah had often used with the children. But first I want to understand why. Why did you do this, Michael? Why didn't you just talk to me? His laugh was bitter. Talk to you? Every time I tried to talk to you about modernizing or expanding, you shot me down. Every new idea was too risky. Every change threatened your precious legacy. He leaned forward. You built this company for a world that doesn't exist anymore, Dad. I'm trying to save it. By stealing it? I kept my voice level. By lying to me, to your sister, to our clients? I did what was necessary, he insisted. The restructuring, the acquisition, they're the right moves. You're just too stubborn to see it. Maybe I am stubborn, I conceded. Maybe some of your ideas have merit. But you didn't give me the chance to consider them as a partner. You went behind my back. You broke the law. You betrayed my trust. Something flickered across his face. A moment of doubt, quickly suppressed. What do you want from me? He asked again. To call off the deal? To risk everything we've built. I want 3 things, I said, laying out the terms Martin and I had discussed. First, you will transfer controlling interest in the company back to me, immediately. Second, you will be completely honest with Meridian about the company's actual situation, the delivery challenges, the quality issues, everything. Third, you will acknowledge to the board and the executive team that the previous transfer of ownership was executed improperly and is being voluntarily corrected. Michael's face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. I'd be admitting to fraud. You would be acknowledging a procedural error, I corrected. No criminal allegations, no charges, but full transparency moving forward. And if I refuse, I opened a folder on the desk and pushed it toward him. Then I file these papers on Monday. A formal complaint with the SEC, a criminal complaint for forgery and fraud, and a civil suit to block the acquisition based on material misrepresentations. I met his eyes. I don't want to do that, Michael. It would hurt the company, it would destroy your career, it would break what's left of our family. You'd really do that? His voice held disbelief. To your own son? To protect what I built? To stand up for what's right? Yes. I leaned forward. But I'm offering you a way out. A chance to fix this without destruction. Your choice. He stared at the folder, his breathing quick and shallow. Even if I agreed to your terms, the deal would probably fall through once Meridian knows the truth. Perhaps. Or perhaps they'll still be interested, just at a more realistic valuation and timeline. But either way, the company will survive, and so will you. The silence stretched between us, heavy with decades of history and the weight of this pivotal moment. I need time to think, he finally said. You have until noon, I replied. After that, I call Meridian. He stood abruptly. You really think you can just walk back in and run things like nothing's changed? The industry has evolved. The competition is different. You've been out of the game. I'm not suggesting nothing changes, I said quietly. I'm suggesting we find a path forward that doesn't begin with theft and lies. Michael left without another word, the door closing firmly behind him. I remained at the desk, mentally reviewing the confrontation and considering possible outcomes. Had I been firm enough? Too harsh? Would he see reason or escalate further? At 11:45, my phone rang. Rebecca. Dad, I just talked to Michael. He sounds broken. What happened? I explained the morning's meeting as objectively as I could. He says you're forcing him to destroy the deal, that you're being vindictive. I'm asking him to be honest, I corrected gently. If the deal can't survive honesty, it shouldn't happen. She was quiet for a moment. He wants me to talk to you, to convince you to back down. And what do you think I should do? I don't know, she admitted. This whole situation is... I never imagined Michael could do something like this, but I also hate seeing our family torn apart. So do I assured her. That's why I'm offering him a way to make things right without legal consequences. But I can't let him take everything I've built based on forgery and lies. I owe that much to myself, to your mother's memory, to the truth. I understand, she said softly. I told him I couldn't intervene, that he needed to deal with this directly. My heart swelled with pride at her integrity. Thank you. At exactly noon, Michael called. I've considered your terms, he said, his voice formal and distant. I'll agree with 2 conditions of my own. First, I remain as COO with meaningful authority. Second, we jointly approach Meridian about a potential future acquisition, with full transparency, but also with a united front. It was more than I had expected. Agreed, I said without hesitation, on the condition that all financial decisions require dual approval until trust is rebuilt. He didn't immediately respond, and for a moment I thought I'd pushed too far. Then, fine. I'll have the paperwork drawn up to reverse the ownership transfer. We can meet with Meridian on Monday. Thank you. Michael, I said, meaning it, this is the right decision. We'll see, he replied, his voice still cold. But Dad, things can't go back to how they were. The company needs to evolve. I know, I acknowledged, and I'm willing to listen, really listen, to your ideas, but as partners, not adversaries. The following weeks were difficult and awkward. The Meridian acquisition was put on hold pending a strategic reassessment, which was our mutual face-saving explanation. Michael and I established a tense working relationship, each watching the other carefully. The board was informed of a restructuring correction without specific details of the forgery, though I suspect most guessed the truth. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. Not just the company, but our relationship. Michael's ideas, when presented openly and discussed thoroughly, often had merit. My experience and caution provided a necessary counterbalance to his aggressive growth strategies. We found, to our mutual surprise, that we could be effective partners when both were heard. Rebecca acted as an occasional mediator when tensions flared, her psychological training proving invaluable. 6 months after that confrontational Saturday, the three of us had our first genuinely pleasant family dinner since Sarah's death. A year later, we did entertain an acquisition offer, not from Meridian but from a competitor who appreciated our solid fundamentals and innovation pipeline. The valuation was less than what Michael had originally negotiated, but it was based on reality, not inflated projections and hidden problems. In the end, we declined the offer. Miller Advanced Manufacturing Solutions, I had conceded on the name change, was now growing sustainably, combining Michael's forward-thinking approach with my insistence on quality and integrity. We had found our balance. Today, 3 years after that devastating discovery of Michael's betrayal, I'm still involved in the company, though I've scaled back to 3 days a week. Michael runs day-to-day operations, consulting me on major decisions. We'll never have the uncomplicated relationship we had when he was a boy, but we found a new kind of respect. Hard-won, fragile at times, but real. Sarah would be proud, I think, not of what happened, but of how we found our way back from the brink, of how we salvaged what mattered most from the wreckage of betrayal. "You're building something that will outlast both of us," she had said all those years ago, her hand on mine in that cold, empty shop. She was right, though not in the way either of us imagined. What endures isn't just the business, the machines, the client relationships. It's the harder, invisible work of rebuilding trust, of finding forgiveness without forgetting, of choosing family over vengeance, truth over comfortable lies. That's the real legacy I hope to leave behind. Not a company name on a building, but the example of how to face betrayal with dignity, how to stand firm for what's right while leaving room for redemption. In the end, I wasn't too old to understand business, as my son once claimed. I understood the most important business of all, the business of being human, of making mistakes and finding the courage to repair them, of building relationships that can bend without breaking. That's a legacy worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth forgiveness. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.